Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who feel overwhelmed and outpaced as they raise healthy youth in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we are joined by Brent Dusing of TruPlay. Thank you, Brent, for joining us.
Great to be here, Nathan.
Really excited for this conversation today, everyone, because Brent is, as I mentioned, the CEO of TruPlay, which is a Christian game design and content creation studio, and just going to have a conversation about video games, the gospel, and kind of everything in between. So, Brent, would you kick us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got to the spot of being the CEO of TruPlay?
Yeah, I've been a technology entrepreneur for a long time, 17, 18 years. Started out my career in Silicon Valley in 2001 as a venture capitalist, then started my first company when I was 26 in 2005 called Cellfire. If you're listening, you might not have ever heard of it, but you might have used our product. If you've ever shopped at Safeway, Kroger, any of their affiliates, Randall's, those kind of QFC for you up in Seattle. If you've ever gone in there and they say, use your cell phone to save money or use digital coupons, that's our product. So I invented that. We sold the business. It was a good outcome for everybody. I then started a company on making games on Facebook. You might remember the days of Farmville on Facebook, right? We made games like that. We didn't make Farmville, but we made games of that kind of style, but that told explicitly biblical narratives. So we did the journey of Jesus, the journey of Moses, a game called Stained Glass, where you played explicitly biblical narratives. And we had 7 million people play these games, and we had people play them, high engagement statistics. We had people playing for long periods of time. The core audience for Journey of Jesus played for 9 years. And so we knew how to build games that, told a biblical narrative, were actually fun and engaging. You could look at engagement statistics, and they indexed much better than kind of the average game on Facebook. And so that's kind of how we got started doing Christian games. And that's 10 years back at Lightside. About 4 years ago, I was kind of asking myself a lot of questions. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I was bothered by what I was seeing, right? I was bothered by the fact that anxiety, suicide, and depression rates are at all-time highs for kids, which exactly mirrors the rise of social media on smartphones. I was bothered by the fact the average male in our country is exposed to pornography when he's 11. And by the way, 4 years ago, that number was 13 years old, so it's worse. So there's so much kind of toxic messaging now dumped on children from all kind of different angles in content, in media, in social media. And you realize the net effect of all those things are the following statistics. For the first time in my life, less than half of Americans go to church. While people over 40, 62% of people over 40 believe in God in America, which is actually pretty good. Only 32% of kids. So it's half, basically, which is how do we get there? To me, that's a crisis. And I think to a lot of people, that's a crisis. And so you look at the reason we got there is because we spend so much time, focusing on different solutions rather than focusing on where a kid's spending their time. They're on screens 52 and a half hours a week. And that's where we've got to focus. And that's where we've got to be. And that's really what TruPlay kind of spurred TruPlay, right? Which is, let's build a multimedia entertainment platform, really high quality, beautiful, fun, exciting entertainment experiences that also convey God's truth.
And that's because they're already there. So this is kind of a boat to fish from approach of the kids are already out there, and we're just going to go amongst them. Yeah. Rather than like, hey, let's try to get these kids in a church per se. So kind of almost like a Young Life model. Would that be a fair?
No, I'd say it like this. Look, I think every kid should be at church. This is not in any way replacing church. It's just that the average, how often are you at church? An hour a week.
Yeah.
Right. And only half of Americans are at church. So they're there 30 minutes a week on average. Right. Yeah. Whereas the average American child is on a screen 50 hours a week. So that's literally 100 to 1. All right. So you look, what did Jesus do? Sure, he spoke in the synagogues, but he was also, to use your metaphor, right, at the fishing docks. He was in the field. He was on the hillsides. He went to parties, by the way, right? And so he was where people were. So today, where are they? Well, kids are on screens. And, I grew up in the 80s listening to a lot of great Christian leaders and pastors who I respect, but essentially saying things like, don't watch that TV show, don't go to that movie, don't listen to that music. Okay, fine. But what am I supposed to do? Like, you can't tell children in 2022, well, just run outside all day and eat tree bark. I mean, that's a nice aspiration, but that's just not realistic. You go to school and they're handed an iPad, right? So if they're going to be digitally engaged, we've got to bring content that's truly excellent and fun and world class, not just mediocre, right? And we've got to be right there.
So then let's start with the question of why video games as that medium for those screens to use those 50 hours.
Great question. A few different reasons. One is that's if you look at the time and money spent in that segment, that's where kids are. And there was more money spent. I think it was $190 billion on just mobile games were spent on last year alone, not counting, PlayStation console or Nintendo console, just phones and tablets. When you look at kids' preferred time that they spend, what they're doing, Roblox, Minecraft, right? Games they're playing right on their iPad, Among Us, Fortnite, games they're playing right on these devices. And so that's the medium, that's the language. I mean, think about when Billy Graham in the 1940s began his ministry. He was using this brand new technology that was radical, which, by the way, not every Christian was okay with. It's called the radio. Now, see, now the radio seems antiquated, right, and outdated, and that's an old thing. But at the time, it was groundbreaking. They'd have ministry shows. You look at, other pastors that would start, TV programs, and that was also considered, wow, TV we're not so sure about that. Can you really tell the gospel? Now it's a normal thing to expect a pastor to have a video up on YouTube, right? So it's just that forms of media continue to evolve and change, and the gospel's got to be right there with it.
So what does that look like then? You mentioned there are games that are explicitly, biblical. So we're talking about Jesus or we're talking about Moses. What does it look like to convey the gospel through a game format? And because in my mind, like, it would be difficult to do without either trivializing it. I know I grew up playing Bible. I played a Fruits of the Spirit game where you put on the armor of God, and I think there was a banana involved at some point. Or like I went and collect sheep for Noah's Ark. So how do you convey the gospel through a game then?
So I'll give you a few examples. So one of our games is called Stained Glass. And Stained Glass was, for a long time, the top Christian game in the App Store. It was designed by a fantastic team, including a couple Apple Award winners. And that actually Stained Glass game will be in the TruPlay app that we're releasing next year. So for everybody out there, before I get into the question, TruPlay was one app with a whole bunch of games, digital comics, video experiences inside one app for kids and families. So to answer your question, with Stained Glass, you're matching glass pieces like a puzzle. Yeah. So that's the game part. You collect the glass pieces you're supposed to collect. They then form pieces of a stained glass window. Once you've collected enough pieces of the stained glass window, they form a stained glass window, and then it comes to life, and a character from the Bible comes and tells you their story. So in Stained Glass, in the beginning, it's Eve, and she's telling you, it would be like if you had a cup of coffee with Eve, and you got to ask, well, what was it like to live in the garden, and what was it like to look in God's eyes and tell him you'd sinned, and what did it feel like for him to say, you can't live here anymore? And so kind of the story of Stained Glass was conveying the Bible is not just a bunch of nice moral stories. The Bible is real people experiencing a real God. Another game that we had that still stands as the most successful game of the genre is called Journey of Jesus. So in that game, you played someone who followed Jesus. So it started out, the first scene was him getting baptized. So we assume no prior knowledge from the player. You walk in, somebody's getting baptized. What is this about? You see the Holy Spirit descend. And your goal in that game, it's kind of a task-oriented game. So as an example, you go to this wedding and this guy's stressed out. And my wedding's going to be ruined, and what's going to happen? And you meet a woman as you go through the party. He says, go talk to my son. He's outside. And you meet a man. He says, hey, go get these water jugs. Collect them for me. So you collect them. And he says, go fill them with water. You fill them with water. Then he turns the water into wine. So it's a very kind of task-driven, conversationally driven game. And there's a lot of games, like Dine or Dash, like Farmville, like a lot of the sim-style games that are kind of appointment mechanic, task-driven games that have been very popular. Now, That's one genre, the biblical games that we make at TruPlay. Inside TruPlay also, there's a new world called the Rimverse. You can see my shirt, which is a little bunny rabbit with a tiger costume on it. Her name is Maple. And there's an animated short you can watch about Maple. We have a new one coming out in a few weeks. And what in the Rimverse, that's obviously fictional, but God is real and the Bible is true. And the characters inside the Rimverse are children who have their own stories and personalities and struggles as well. We can get into one of the kids' parents are divorced, one of them's brother died, one of them's adopted, and they're working through stuff. But they're also combating real evil. And they're also going on these adventures and quests because there are these evil forces in the world that are trying to, manipulate or destroy or take power. And so through the course of the different games and episodes and stories, they're confronting those things, but the kids are praying. God shows up sometimes in the way that they expect and sometimes not. And, it's kind of a juxtaposition of, I think in our culture now, not as many people, we kind of almost lost a meaning of what is truth. And so juxtaposing, well, what is truth? Well, truth is from the Bible. And what does that mean? And so there's a lot of that's driven inside the narrative very explicitly in what we call the Rimverse, which is Maple and all of her friends.
Okay. And is the Rimverse, is that a specific game or is that a thread that gets woven throughout multiple of these games?
It's more of the latter. It's a universe in and of itself that multiple games are contained in, as well as animations. And so in other words, each of our characters, we have about 6 or 7 main characters, Maple, Lucas, Oliver, Ava. They each have their own game. They then combine in each other's games. They have team up games where they'll, all combine forces to fight a certain bad guy. And there's digital comics inside the platform as well. If you go to our website at TruPlayGames.com, there's an animated short. You can watch the very beginning of the story. And so it's kind of like there's this meta narrative that's woven over a long, long period of time. And then each individual game is a self-contained story and adventure in and of itself that feeds into the larger narrative. It's like an episodic TV show. You can watch one episode and get an episodic story, then there's a larger thread that continues over time.
Just as you were talking about that, I don't know if this is a good comparison, so I apologize in advance. It sounds like kind of the video game version of almost a VeggieTales, where you have an intentional gospel message, not current VeggieTales, old school VeggieTales, back when they talked about Jesus. But that idea of conveying an intentional message, in this case, it'd be interactive, and you have your recurring characters, you have your recurring themes and interactions between them, and you kind of grow along with them.
It's a little less like VeggieTales and a little bit more like if the Avengers was telling a story that was Christian. Like how when the Avengers started, and you started with Iron Man, and then ultimately ending with the Avengers Endgame. Forget about what's happened since then, but at that point, right, that was like an 11-year buildup for a certain story arc to be paid off.
Yeah.
Even though within each movie there was always a narrative that was being resolved as well, even though they were large. So in other words, rather than what other people have typically done, which is syndicated content tends to be like if you watch an old episode of Seinfeld or Cheers, everything started in the episode, it ultimately resolves, right? You're essentially are friends, and the same thing happens over and over again from the beginning of the story to the end. Whereas if you watch most serialized television shows today, what's happening in that episode, in episode 1, directly impacts what goes on in episode 2 and 3 and so forth, right?
For the Crown or whatever. It's
the Crown, exactly. It's a little bit more like that, where again you've got but again, they're in this world where God is real and the Bible is true, but they're also combating real evil. So it's not so much about telling kind of a self-contained story. It's about a larger, broader narrative about, again, with characters who I think are more relatable, because it's about, again, it's issues kids deal with. One of them, like Maple, she's just headstrong. So she really believes in God. She has a high degree of faith, but she doesn't really care about other people's opinions. So that's like her deal, right? And now someone else is Oliver, who's our kind of bookworm. He's our nerd. He thinks he knows everything because he thinks he's read all the books, and he's also adopted. So he's kind of struggling with that. Where's God and all that? So it's dealing more with characters that I think issues kids are dealing with today.
Okay, thank you. I think that helps at least me, and I hope our listeners as well. As we think about what does true play look like? What would that mean for our families? I guess a pair of questions come out of that then. who is your intended audience for this? When we come to who you're hoping is going to pick up this app, play these games, and what, all right, let's ask that one first, because then that next question kind of splits.
Sure.
So first.
So our audience is really, we find families. So it's built to be enjoyed by kids from 5 years old up. But we also find a lot of adults playing our games. So we were talking previously about Stained Glass and Journey of Jesus, which were previous games we made that we're remastering for the TruPlay platform. Those are games mostly played by adults. We had a lot of kids play them. When we test all the time with kids. Yeah. And we find a lot of adults want to play the games too. Maple, Little Light, Stained Glass. So that's the thing, is that it's kind of like if you've got kids, if you watched a good animated movie with your kids, you actually enjoy it yourself.
Yeah.
That's the way that we really design and that we write to be enjoyed by adults as well as kids.
So primarily kids, parents coming in. It sounds like of Christian families, primarily like supporting a message at home, or is this intended to be an outreach like Jesus for the Win is a group, that goes out to gaming conferences and just presents the Bible, and that's it. Just Jesus loves you, right? Like just handing out basically tracts at gaming conferences. Is it that idea of like, we just want to be a game that anyone would enjoy? If it happens to be gospel, or is this, man, people are gaming and there's really no content a Christian family can appreciate, so we want to make it for that group?
It's really both. So I'll give you some interesting statistics. So when we did at Lightside, where everything we did was explicitly biblical, we had 7 million people play our games. A third of them were not Christians.
Yeah.
With TruPlay, we've done a lot of survey data. We found 58% of non-Christians were interested. They said, we had an independent secular firm interview 500 non-Christian families, and 58% said we'd be interested in subscribing to this. Because so the answer is it's both. We're feeding the Christian family, because the reality is, and I've got kids too, and I don't know if you do as well.
I do, yeah. Nine, 7, and 3.5.
Yeah, so you're right in the middle of it, right? So what options do you have? What do you have as entertainment options for your children that purport your values? They're few and far between. When's the last time you're able to go into a store, a Target or a Walmart, and buy a t-shirt that had anything to do with Christianity, right? Yeah. When's the last time you were able to buy your kid a Christian toy? They don't exist. So we're feeding a market in the Christian audience that's really looking for things that they can trust, because I think a lot of Christian families are now feeling what we're hearing. They've lost a lot of trust from established companies, established content. They're not sure what's safe for their kids anymore. As well, on the second hand, there are a lot of families who aren't Christians, but who want good, wholesome, positive entertainment for their kids. They don't want their kids playing Grand Theft Auto. Yeah. They're worried about the chat rooms and things that go on a lot of these online games. And they're also worried about a lot of the, over-sexualized, hyper-violent stuff that also goes on in general content that's marketed for kids. And they don't trust that either. And so they know that this is a message that they can trust with foundations and principles that they can get behind.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification, because I do think that's, I don't know, it's a fascinating idea of how are you guys going about it, which I guess is the second part of the question for how do you determine, and this is going to be a little bit in the weeds, listeners, please bear with me. I do love the weeds sometimes, especially in gaming. How do you determine which games are going to be a good fit? So you have your Rimverse and you have your kind of big picture vision of families and young people, positive content, but how do you determine which games are going to fit that? And then within that, the second part of that question is, how do you determine which, I guess, game development tools are enough engagement to make it in fun and entertaining, but not so much that it becomes manipulative and starts building that Y'all, hooked loop of behavioral training, where now this is where we go when we feel sad. Instead of running to the Lord, we run to a game about the Lord, which is good for fun, but not good for kind of the secondary needs that we have spiritually and emotionally. So how do you guys manage both of those?
So to the first part of your question, the way that we make sure that it's conveying God's truth, so the parameter we use is everything we do has to convey God's truth. It doesn't have to be a biblical game. I mean, obviously there aren't bunny rabbits with tiger costumes running around the forest in the Bible, clearly.
Right.
But in Maple, for example, she does quote the Bible periodically because she's a Christian. She does take actions and make decisions based on her faith. And she prays and God shows up, just like with all of us, sometimes in ways we expect, in other ways, some ways we don't expect, right? Mm-hmm. but God's a real part of her story. And so in the Maple story, if you watch the animated short on our TruPlay website, it's the very beginnings of the story, but what she ultimately is realizing, there's this evil, manipulative queen in the forest who's twisted the meaning of truth, and she's manipulating that to kind of seize power, but what it's really doing is destroying the entire environment, right? So it's really the whole message of Maple is that words matter, truth matters, what we believe matters, what we say matters, and that's what's woven into that story over time. And as I said, the Bible is woven into that. Now, other games we make, like Stained Glass, like Journey of Jesus, we have another game we're building called King David's Battles. Those are explicit games, straight out of the Bible. So in just the same way that someone might make a movie or a TV show about Jesus, right? Or a movie or a TV show about King David, let's make a video game, right? It's a media form that people are using that's become very popular. There's a lot of darkness in video games, obviously. There's a lot of neutral stuff. I'm not here to tell you there's something wrong with Candy Crush. I mean, it is what it is. It's, go have fun. But there's hardly anything you can find in games that are positive, that's uplifting from a spiritual, moral standpoint. And that's what we're delivering, whether, again, it's Rimverse or King David's Battle, or the Bible. So in other words, we hang everything against how is this conveying God's truth, whether it's out of the Rimverse, it's biblical, or it's even metaphorical. We even have a game called Little Light. Remember that little kid's nursery rhyme, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine"? There's a game we have based on that. So you're this flame and you're lighting up these candles and lighting up this dark world, and there's some scripture woven into it. It's a fun little game. So that's really the way that we look and analyze to answer that part of your question. I think the second part was, how do we kind of think about engagement, right? Yeah. So first of all, TruPlay will be a subscription service. So there's no in-app purchases, right? So part of the issue you get into if you think about if you're building a game, a lot of companies build in-app purchases, and that's, they have business reasons that they do that. And a lot of times that's just the way the economics have to work. But then you get into these issues when you design these games that some game developers have to try to entice people to spend money, buy coins, buy extra lives, buy boosts and power-ups. Well, in TruPlay, because it's a subscription, you subscribe once and you get access to everything, just like a Netflix subscription, works. And so there's no kind of hidden extra, pay me more money, let me try to, trick you into spending more money inside the game kind of mechanics. Yeah. And so what it's really about then is just creating a fun, compelling experience for the player.
Yeah, thank you. And that is an area of specific passion for me, is that idea of engagement. I feel like many, especially AAA game studios, tend to act a little bit like Coca-Cola circa 1900, where they have a great product, but it hasn't had the cocaine removed from it yet. And we're delivering these games that basically developing brains can't put down. They don't have the inhibition of the frontal cortex to be able to walk away and go, oh no, that was enough. I enjoyed it, and now I should move on. I'm looking at you, prestige classes. Call of Duty's medal system is like a textbook class in how to make more content with doing zero extra programming. So that's just my personal pet peeve. Not, by the way, the opinion of Brent. That's just Nathan Sutherland's opinion, folks. Want to make sure you don't go on the record here, Brent. Sorry about that. But thank you for that. Like, that's awesome to hear. Kind of that's how you go about thinking through the games and making them. It sounds like games. Like there's a challenge, there's a rule set, there's a victory condition, and in that is both the focus on biblical concepts, even if they're not scripture per se, but they are biblically grounded, rooted, anchored. And then in addition to that, like just they're fun to play. They're wholesome. They're not going to scorch your conscience.
Juxtapose it a different way. I mean, if you were going to make a movie, there'd be no question in your mind that you'd want the movie to be made in a way that's fun and engaging, that people actually enjoy it. I mean, regardless of the message, right? That if you were making a Christian movie, that it should be fun and engaging, right? Or it should, it be entertaining, right? Because that's half the reason people are there, or more so, right? So in the same way, it's the same thing with a game. You've got to design it in a way that it's fun and compelling and interesting to use, because if it's not, then kids will just go play Minecraft and Fortnite and everything else.
Yeah, and Minecraft. I guess the reason I was asking is there are games that they have an interesting concept, but they don't allow the interesting concept to carry the day. and this might be me going way too deep in the weeds, but I'll just to kind of wrap up the thought, because I love where you're taking it. And that's what I was trying to say is there are games that I think started as an interesting idea. They realized they could make it more profitable. And so they added layers of motivation that didn't come from the player. The player's now being convinced these other things are now important, where it's never anything they wanted to play the game. And this is saying, sure, you wanted the game, but now you also want this. And it gives you that next nudge. And once you accomplish that nudge, right, the neuroplasticity takes over at some point. That's when you start playing games that you don't like it anymore. Why are you still playing it? I don't know. I'm just so invested, right? And that answer, and it sounds like on your guys' end, you're being intentional about, no, we're just going to play games. And when it's not fun, you'll quit playing. We're not going to, trap you here for any reason. That's awesome. I think to kind of finish this question, I'd love to hear what's a game or an experience in the gaming world that's been motivational to you that you found, like, just personally in your development as a human being. You said child of the 80s. So we were right there.
I mean, Zelda is a wonderful, the Zelda series is a wonderful game.
All right.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first one came out, it was 1986. So I was
gold cartridge.
8. That's right. The first two were the gold cartridge. That's right.
Yeah.
But it should, however many years later, what is it? 36 years later, it should have absolutely been the gold cartridge, because it really was the best game made by a mile. I mean, what Shigeru Miyamoto and the other developers were able to do with the little bit of technology they had, right? To design that first Zelda game. Now, Zelda 2 was okay, but Zelda 3,
Link to the Past is where it's at.
That's right. The Super Nintendo, right? The Zelda 3, Link to the Past. You can see, I've never heard him say this publicly, but you can kind of see if you study the game, it's probably the game he really wanted to make. And they finally had the tech to make it in the early 90s that they didn't have in the mid 80s. And it's still a masterpiece. I mean, it's still fun. It's still beautiful. Zelda's one of those games where, it's like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yeah. The music, the artistry, the combat, the puzzles, the mystery, all kind of weave together to make what I still think are the best video games ever made. I mean, I'm still a huge fan of Skyward Sword. I know I might get lit up on in the comments about that one, but I think was a beautiful, fun game. So that's one that I think, when you're building games and you're building content, right? And it's true for TV shows as well and movies. All of us geek out on different things. I'm a huge fan of the Zelda series. I'm a huge fan of the Star Wars, the original 3, not the last 3. And a lot of my colleagues would say that, and they'd have other things that they're big fans of as well. Because everybody you draw your source of inspiration from a lot of different places. But all of us were little kids once and got inspired by seeing these worlds bigger than capturing our imagination.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I'm right there with you on Zelda. I'm glad to hear there's another kindred spirit out there. Thank you for your time. Where can people find out more about TruPlay, about Maple, about the resources and opportunities you've got coming up?
Yeah, just please join us on TruPlayGames.com. This is something we hope everybody enjoys. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Discord. Please hop on there. Enter your email address. We're launching TruPlay next year, so hop on the email to get updates.
What quarter next year do you think?
We haven't announced that yet.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
So we're still testing. We're still doing a lot of testing and beta and things.
That's awesome.
Just would love to have people jump on and support. I mean, listen, this is something that we know Christian families have been, asking us for. There's millions of Christian families out there who want this, and there's a lot of non-Christian families who want this too. And we really will see lives change. And look, we've got to all band together as believers to really help change culture for our kids. When you look at how alarming the statistics are on children falling away from God, on all the anxiety and suicide and depression rates, all the toxic things they're exposed to, we've got to make a big push in the other direction. It's got to come with, positivity and truth and engagement, not just saying no to something, but giving them something to say yes to. And that's why TruPlay's here.
That's amazing. Well, Brent, thank you for your work. Thank you for your time this morning, and excited to see where TruPlay goes.
Thanks, Nathan. I enjoyed it.
You can find more of the amazing work Brent and the TruPlay team are doing at TruPlayGames.com or on Instagram at TruPlay Games. And you can join us next week as we continue this conversation here about how we can love God and use tech.